Welcome to the worksheet, this week's worksheet, which is working with our pen weights and working with textures. So you'll need to have your worksheet printed out. You'll need to have a pencil, your Flair pen, and your 0.5 pen. You'll also need a scale and a straight edge and printing out the library sheet textures. So I'm going to set this to the side for the moment. First thing that we want to discover when we're starting to work with pens and that sort of thing is that we want to be comfortable enough with our pens so that we don't get, all scared and nervous and all those kinds of things. So part of what we do is we use guidelines. And this first row, top left, these are vertical lines. And what you're going to find is that you are either going to be more comfortable with vertical lines or you're going to be more comfortable with horizontal lines. Now, I understand that distance makes a big difference also, but most students are usually one or the other. And in that case, keep in mind that your page is not stationary. You can turn it. So if you're more comfortable drawing horizontal lines as you go through here, then just turn your page instead of drawing a vertical line. In the same way with here, if you're more comfortable drawing vertical lines, then just turn your page. But for us to be able to try this and see which ones work the best for us, let's just go ahead and not turn our page this time. I'm going to come in and I'm going to add a guideline, very, very soft. And I don't know if you can see this, but I'm doing this very, very softly. And what I want is to use my Flair pen, and I just want to draw vertically. So in this case, I have some dots that I've put on, so they're nice and evenly spaced. And whether you draw from bottom to top or top to bottom, doesn't really matter. Both are perfectly fine. What's more comfortable with you. And you see I get a little bobble in there every once in a while, and that's fine. That's what makes it freehand. Once you get to these dots and the dots are gone, just try to continue that same spacing until you get to the next piece. Try to keep your lines nice and vertical as you're going through this. And our guideline in this case just tells us when to stop our line and start our line. When we start getting close to these bubbles over here, these dots over here, you can stop. All right, now those were our vertical lines, and I guess we did okay. And now we're going to try horizontal lines, and I'm just going to put in some guidelines here. And if it's helpful, go ahead and put in guidelines for your horizontals, if that helps to make you a little bit more comfortable. You're going to get bobbles either way. So I'm just going to take those all the way through. And these, again, are nice and evenly spaced. So I'm going to go from the left of the page and across to the right. From left to right, or if you're left-handed, right to left. It doesn't really matter. What we want is a nice, consistent line that is smooth as possible. Now, I tend to like horizontal lines better, but that's just me. There you go. All right, so that's horizontals and verticals. So now, depending on what you're more comfortable with, what we want to do is take each one of these shapes, the square, the triangle, and the circle, and we want to draw them here. And I've put dots, so you're just connecting the dots. And again, I draw better from an angle. So you want to practice crossing your lines. Nice and simple, connecting the dots. Again, we're still working with our Flair pen. Circles are the absolute worst, but that's okay. We got to get used to that. So just try freehanding a circle that's about the same. Oops. Look, I got a little bobble over there. That's perfectly fine to have a bobble. All right, now, there are 10 squares across here, or dots for squares. So what I want you to do is use your flare pen, and you're simply going to fill all of the 10 squares. Again, we're outlining with our flare pen. Again, this is great practice for you to overlap and be consistent on the overlap of the corners. This is good practice for you. Ever so slightly, each corner overlaps about the same distance, and it just takes practice. So you're filling in all these squares. Just like that. There you go. Now that's all of our flare pen work. And we're going to put our flare pen away for the moment. And we're going to get out our double aught 5. But before we do that, I want you to print out the textures sheet. And this is just a library of textures. And remember, we're still working freehand and tracing our guidelines. But these are just a bunch of different kinds of textures. You may like some better than others, but there's just different ways of doing textures. And there are 3 or 4 pages of those. So the way this drawing is set up, this flat rectangle here on the front is what this product would look like in plan. So that's plan view or elevation. This tapered section back in here is what it would look like in perspective. The same exact texture, just plan view and in perspective. What we're doing on this exercise is just the 2-dimensional. So plan view or elevation. So we're just looking at what the squares look like in the front. So now what I want to do is take this first one, and I'm going to use my scale. And I'm going to just see how big these are. They're a little larger than an inch. So let's use, I don't know, we want to divide it into 4 equal spaces. So you can do this with your handy dandy measuring device, or you can use it with any scale that you want. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to place with my guidelines very, very lightly. I'm going to put in a grid, and we are going to do a basket weave texture. Now you see I didn't measure that end one very well, did I? That's going to cause us some problems. So I'm just going to move that one over just a hair, a little bit, and move this one over just a hair. All right, so now we're going to take our double aught 5, and we're going to do horizontal lines from point to point inside the square, and we're going to do every other one. Guidelines are very helpful when it comes to texture, so use those guidelines. Make sure that you complete every line. Don't do one short, take it right up to the guideline. I'm doing kind of just a checkerboard pattern here. nice and neat. Make sure that you complete every single line. And if there's a little overlap, that's perfectly fine. Now I'm going to turn my page because I like my horizontals better. And I'm going to do the same thing here. See how I'm taking it up to the last one and I'm completing each line. And some of my corners overlap just a little bit, and nothing wrong with that. Nice and consistent lines. Remember that our textures are always freehand, but we want to use our guidelines to help us keep these lines as straight as possible. So that's a basket weave texture. So that would be very similar to what is here on this example. So let's just try doing this one, which is a common concrete texture, and it's very vertical. So I'm not going to draw every one of those vertical lines, but I'm going to give myself about every 1/4 of an inch or so, because I can eyeball that distance. And I'm just going to do, but that'll help me keep my line straight and I won't start tilting. So we're going to just do a nice continuous line from top to bottom. If you start to lean, don't try to correct it. Just when you get to one of your guidelines, use that to help you a little bit. But see how my lines stop and start at my frame that I did with my flare pin. Now I'm tilting a little, so I want to straighten that back up. We want that little bit of ripple. That's perfectly fine. We don't want nice rigid lines. We want them to be relatively freehand. And if I look closely at that particular texture, it also has a dot pattern over the top of it. And dot patterns are best done straight up, straight down, straight up, straight down. You have to be very careful because it's very easy to get what we call tails. And that's when we get lazy and we kind of do this sort of thing. You want to make sure that you're straight up, straight down, straight up, straight down. And once we start a texture, we have to complete the entire object in that texture. We don't just do parts of objects like you learned in drafting. We're doing presentation drawings, and we don't do little portions. We complete the entire section. So let me show you one more. We'll do one more together. And I'm going to do, I'm going to do a wood plank. And this is a random plank, so they're different thicknesses. Again, I'm going to just use very soft line vertically, and I'm going to make different thicknesses as I go across. So in this case, I am going to use a little plank line. I don't always, but this time I'm going to. And now we're going to do our wood grain lines. And remember, wood grains never cross one another. Trees grow in rings, so there's no way that the grain can actually cross. So change your direction with each plank so it's quite clear. You don't match up the grain in this particular case. Maybe I'll do a little longer line this time. That would be a random width plank. Again, make sure it goes all the way to the edges. Complete all lines. So what I want you to do is, for each one of the other squares, I want you to just play with some of the textures that are in here, and try to repeat them and see how they look and how you practice them. And if you look at this, these both are stone patterns. These are both stone patterns. This is more of a river rock, but notice how the rocks aren't amoebas. They don't flow around one another. They butt right up against one another with a little bit of space. So don't make stones that are like U-shape and put a little one in the middle. Make that up with maybe 2 or 3 rocks in the shape. So be very, very careful of that. So there's lots of different textures on here for you to practice with. Just pick out 10 that you really, really like and go ahead and put those on there. Lastly, we want to put, because this is a worksheet, we want to do our title. And remember, our standard title is 1 inch up, then 1/8 of an inch, and then 1/4 of an inch for the title. There we go. And below the line is 1/8 inch and 1/8 inch. So 1/8 inch space from the line, and then 1/8 inch from for our name at 1/8 inch. So then we do 1 inch over and 1 inch over, and then lightly put in your guidelines. And then this is our line that goes all the way across. Remember, we're going from our 1 inch, so that's our line. That's going to be our freehand line. And then here is our name, 1/8 of an inch down. Make sure that's nice and straight. It's going to stop here, and it's going to start here. And remember, I like to use my sign pen, but you can use any size of pen that you want. And it's a nice, long, horizontal line. And you can stop if you want. You just need to pick it up right at the same point, right over. Alrighty, so with your Flair pen, this will be pen weights and textures in your best handwriting. And then with your Pilot pen at 1/8 inch, you're going to write your name. And use that vertical straight edge. And stretch those letters out. So you're going to fill up the whole page, or you're going to fill up all 10 squares with textures from the texture library. Alrighty? Good luck with that.